Be careful what you wish for.
I don't really mind. I don't do bad stuff.
Okay, I will explain. If this is not on your screen, look at your neighbor or look up here. Your job is to close your mouth, open your ears and your mind. I will explain. In the late 1400s, people in Europe eagerly explored the world around them, searching for new and better ways to trade with people in other parts of the world, especially the Far East. Europeans yearned for the spices, jewels, and perfumes, silk cloth that could be found in places like China in the East Indies. Does that jive with last week? Yeah. Were Europeans looking for porcelain and silk from China and vice versa? Yeah. Okay, here's what you don't fully appreciate until this week. How much work and how dangerous it was to get to those places. Because in our class, you walked across the room and said, hey, Safavids, trade you some Spanish gold for your carpet or rugs. Okay, and you just walked across the room. So this week is going to be about maritime exploration in the 15th century, a.k.a. dudes who got on ships and sailed into the great unknown. Okay? To get to Asia, the Portuguese sailed around Africa, but the voyage was perilous and took a very long time. Christopher Columbus tried to find a shortcut to Asia by sailing west from Spain, but instead stumbled upon the Americas, a place the Europeans didn't even know existed, thus the Old World of Europe and the New World of the Americas. Now, point of contention with historians such as myself. What credit does Christopher Columbus really deserve for his expedition? Like, what was he really the first person to do? Exactly. Here's a misconception. He discovered the Americas. First of all, native people had lived there for tens of thousands of years. So that's like saying someone from Idaho was the first guy to come into Wyoming and find us and say, I discovered Wyoming. No, you didn't. You might be the first person from your part of the world to discover us, but if people are living there, how do you discover it? Okay? Second point of contention. He wasn't even the first European to show up here. Most historians agree, not all, but most, Vikings made landfall in Greenland and Canada at least 500 years before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. Whoa. Now, here's what's different between him and those Vikings. He came home. They didn't. Okay, and I know it seems hard for you to understand, but if you're a Viking who makes it to Greenland and sets up a colony, you don't write a letter home. You don't take your smartphone and take a selfie on Instagram and say, oh, I found the new world, and send it back. No one ever heard from you again. So for all they knew, you're dead.
They didn't have Instagram.
I know. They had no way to communicate back. So, no. Christopher Columbus is the first guy to get there and home to tell about it. That's what he gets credit for. Now, how he treated people and what he did and what kind of guy he was is a whole nother story. Okay, all I'll say is a popular thing right now in states like South Dakota, they don't appreciate the fact that he gets a federal holiday, Christopher Columbus Day, so they replaced it. Does anyone know what the cool new trend is to replace? How do you replace Columbus Day with Columbus Day? You're not replacing Native American Day. Kind of like some people say, and there are valid points to support this, he was a jerk to the native people. Okay, so for example, he took six Indians back to Spain, and I think 2 or 3 of them died along the way. And he wasn't exactly a nice guy. So some people say he's evil, some say he's brave. The thing we can agree on, he's the first person to get to the New World and back to tell about it. So we're not saying he's a good, nice guy you should hang out with, or he wasn't, but he's the first one to get to the New World and back. Question?
I saw this video of like the native people, and they're like comparing Christopher Columbus to like Stalin and Hitler.
Well, he did bring diseases with him, but I suppose that's not really his fault. A lot of Native Americans think very lowly of Christopher Columbus. Like, where I lived in South Dakota was on a reservation. I don't think I told you guys that. The 2 people historically that the tribe I lived with really hated, Christopher Columbus and George Armstrong Custer, because they were Sioux. Okay?
Who's the other guy?
Custer?
That little big
I went to that.
Listen, This is why Google's awesome. When you're done with class, just Google George Armstrong Custer.
Did you ever go to the Battle of Bighorn?
Yes, I've seen the reenactment. It's right outside Mrs. Blair's hometown. Hardin.
Oh, hard.
And I've never seen the reenactment.
Because people who grew up there, it's like, that's not cool.
I went to it and we got like, we went there right before closing time and we went and I can't.
They do it like once a week or something, and it's really cool. Okay, moving on. During this age of discovery, the life of an explorer was both exciting and treacherous. Listen. Floating on a seemingly endless ocean aboard a small wooden ship, sailors feared that if they sailed too far from land, they would fall off the edge of the earth. Several believed in giant sea monsters and mermaids that might eat you, like the Kraken. And yet, for all their superstitious beliefs, religion played a big role in explorers' lives. A day on board a ship typically began with prayer and ended with religious services. Knowing that the two main European countries who were exploring at the time were Portugal and Spain, does that jive with what we know about their religious views from last week? Okay, what religion were both of those empires? Catholic, and what flavor?
Strict.
Zealous, pushy, Catholic or die flavor. So it seems weird that they'd be afraid of sea monsters and falling off the earth, but at the same time very Christian. Okay? Then the sailors set to work in 4-hour shifts, pumping seawater and filth out of the ship's bilge, cleaning and wetting the deck, working the sails, and checking lines and cargo. They slept on the hard wooden deck. The Native Americans they later encountered taught them how to make and use hammocks, because Europeans hadn't figured that out. Meals were cooked in a small firebox when the sea was calm, and if someone had been lucky enough to catch a fish. Most meals, however, were eaten cold. Sailors often dined on tasteless hard biscuits, sometimes with weevils in them. Oatmeal, also filled with bugs. Bacon and dried meat, dried fruit, dried peas, cheese, and oil. Could you answer that for me? Just say Mr. McKelkey's room.
Student speaking, Mr.
Drinking water would go bad after several weeks at sea, unless there was rainwater to refill the water barrels. Sailors drank from a large store of beer and wine, which took longer to spoil. He needs me? Gosh.